The forgotten story of Joseph's death, a prophecy fulfilled through the centuries. Few people remember the biblical account of Joseph's death in Egypt. His story is often overshadowed by his earlier triumphs, the betrayal by his brothers, his rise to power, and his ultimate role in saving his family during the Great Famine. Yet what happened after his death is just as significant, holding a prophetic weight that would unfold across centuries. Joseph was one of the few biblical figures whose body was embalmed and placed in an Egyptian sarcophagus. Remarkably, his remains were not buried for generations, despite his deep desire to rest in the land of his ancestors. Instead, his bones were carried across vast deserts for years, awaiting the fulfillment of a divine promise. But why would a man who had once held the second highest position in all of Egypt insist that his bones be transported to a distant land? This question opens the door to a deeper understanding of Joseph's faith and the larger biblical narrative at play. Joseph is one of the central figures in the book of Genesis, playing a pivotal role in the unfolding story of the patriarchs. He was one of the 12 sons of Jacob, and from a young age he was the target of great jealousy from his brothers. This animosity stemmed from his prophetic dreams, which set him apart, and from the special favor that his father openly showed him. Living in a tense and hostile family environment, Joseph's fate took a drastic turn when his own brothers sold him to a caravan of merchants traveling to Egypt. Once in Egypt, Joseph's life was marked by trials and unexpected turns. He was first sold into the household of Potiphar, an official of Pharaoh, where he proved himself trustworthy. However, he was falsely accused of wrongdoing and imprisoned. Even in chains, Joseph remained faithful and displayed unwavering integrity. The biblical account highlights how, by divine guidance, Joseph interpreted the dreams of Pharaoh, revealing that Egypt would experience years of abundance, followed by years of severe famine. His wisdom and foresight led to his immediate elevation as the second most powerful man in Egypt, overseeing the kingdom's food supply and ensuring the survival of the people. When famine struck not only Egypt, but also surrounding regions, including Canaan, Joseph's estranged family sought provisions in Egypt. In a dramatic and emotional reunion, Joseph, once rejected by his brothers, was now in a position to save them. The biblical text records how Jacob's entire family migrated to Egypt, settling in a fertile region ideal for their livestock. Years passed, and Jacob, Joseph's father, eventually grew old and died in Egypt. Out of deep respect and filial devotion, Joseph ensured that his father's body was transported and buried in Canaan, honoring Jacob's final wish. This act reflected the family's enduring connection to the land that God had promised to their ancestors. After Jacob's death, Joseph's relationship with his brothers remained a focal point of the narrative. Fearing possible retribution for their past betrayal, his brothers sought reassurance. However, Joseph extended mercy, emphasizing that God had used their actions, though intended for harm, for a greater good. This theme of divine sovereignty is one of the defining messages of Joseph's life. As Joseph aged in Egypt, he lived to see multiple generations of his descendants, witnessing not only his grandchildren, but also his great-grandchildren. However, his final years were marked by a prophetic declaration about Israel's future and a firm instruction regarding his own burial. The Bible describes Joseph's death in Genesis 50 with solemn brevity but deep significance. He lived to the age of 110, a number that, according to Egyptian belief, represented a full and blessed life. This perspective aligns with archaeological and historical sources that suggest the number 110 symbolized a complete and ideal lifespan in ancient Egyptian culture. Before his passing, Joseph reassured his brothers, alleviating their lingering fears of retaliation. He famously said, "You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good." This statement underscores Joseph's unwavering belief that God's purposes transcend human actions, even those driven by malice and injustice. Following this, Joseph made a prophetic declaration. "I am about to die, but God will surely visit you and bring you up out of this land to the land that he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob." This statement directly references the promise originally given to Abraham in Genesis 15, where God foretold that Abraham's descendants would sojourn in a foreign land, endure oppression, and eventually be delivered. Joseph's insistence that his bones be carried out of Egypt when the time came for Israel's liberation demonstrates his unshakable faith in God's promise. This command was not a mere sentimental wish, but a deliberate act of trust in the covenant. The narrative concludes by stating that Joseph was embalmed and placed in a sarcophagus in Egypt. This was a practice reserved for individuals of high political and social status, reflecting the honor he had attained. His mummification aligns with the well-documented Egyptian burial customs, which sought to preserve the body for the afterlife, a belief deeply ingrained in Egyptian religion. The fact that Joseph received such treatment highlights the respect he commanded in Egypt, yet he never lost sight of his true identity. Despite being honored as an Egyptian leader, he remained an Israelite at heart, longing for the fulfillment of God's promise. For centuries, his remains remained in Egypt, symbolizing the tension between Israel's prosperity in a foreign land and their ultimate destiny in the Promised Land. The book of Exodus later recounts how, during the great deliverance led by Moses, Joseph's bones were finally taken out of Egypt. After Joseph's death, the Israelites continued to live in Egypt, initially enjoying favorable conditions. Many historians and biblical scholars suggest that Joseph's rise to power may have occurred during the rule of the Hyksos, a Semitic dynasty that governed Egypt during the Second Intermediate Period, circa 15th century BCE. However, this remains a topic of debate, as the biblical text does not specify the names of the pharaohs involved. Over time, a significant shift occurred. The opening chapters of Exodus describe the rise of a new king who did not know Joseph. This phrase likely signifies a change in dynastic rule, leading to a dramatic shift in Egyptian policy toward the Israelites. The memory of Joseph's contributions faded, and the Israelites, once welcomed, found themselves subjected to harsh oppression and forced labor. This change set the stage for the Great Exodus. The oppression of the Israelites fueled their longing for liberation, making Joseph's final instructions all the more significant. He had anticipated that God would one day deliver them, and his request to be buried in Canaan reinforced Israel's identity as a people destined for a greater inheritance. Joseph's unburied body became a tangible reminder of the promise yet to be fulfilled. Though embalmed and entombed in Egypt, his heart remained in the land of his forefathers. His faith, even in death, served as a testimony that God's word would come to pass. Centuries later, when Moses led the Israelites out of Egypt, they carried Joseph's bones with them. This act was not just about honoring his last wishes. It was a declaration that they were leaving Egypt behind, not just physically, but spiritually. Joseph's story, which had begun with betrayal and exile, came full circle in the nation's journey home. The account of Joseph's death is not just a historical footnote. It is a powerful illustration of faith, divine sovereignty, and the certainty of God's promises. His life exemplifies how, even in the face of adversity, God's plans prevail. His death, though seemingly the end of his story, was in fact a continuation of a prophetic journey that would shape the destiny of an entire nation. In the grand narrative of the Bible, Joseph's final request serves as a bridge between Genesis and Exodus, between captivity and freedom, between promise and fulfillment. It reminds us that God's timeline is not limited to one lifetime, but spans generations, weaving together a story of redemption that echoes throughout history. If this video has inspired you, don't forget to subscribe for more content like this. And of course, share your experiences in the comments. Together we can build a strong and positive community. Thank you for joining us on this journey of growth and transformation. See you in the next video.